palūkšu mūsu trešo ziņotāju, Oskaru Skribīnu, un pateikt savu viedokli, un sniegt savu ziņojumu. Es gribētu viņš pierast tādu faktu visu uzmanību. Latvijā ir suverēna valsts noteikti. Reizi mēs esam Eiropas Savienības dalībvalsts, kas nosaka mums atkal savās tagad ir modīgi pateikts sarkanas līnijas. Mēs esam arī pievienojušies Pasaules tirdzniecības organizācijai, kas patiesībā arī mums ierobežo mūsu iespējas aizstāvēt savu tirgu, jo mēs nevaram, piemēram, ieviest muitas nodevas, mums ir ierobežojumi mūsu sniegt, dotēt mūsu ekonomiku, un patiesībā reizē mēs varam no Eiropas Savienības gūt naudu no fondiem, no kohēzijas fondiem, piemēram. Bet tomēr, kā skatās Eiropas Savienībā uz fiskālu politiku kā līdzekli, kurā var izmantot, lai regulētu dalībvalsts ekonomikas attīstību. Šo jautājumu es uzdevu mūsu trešajam ziņotājam, zinātņu doktoram no Frankfurtes, Heinzam Christianam Hafke, kurš bija padomnieks Vācijas centrālbankā. Viņš nodarbojas arī par centrālbankas departamenta vietnieku. Pēc tam viņš bija žurnālists un vadīja vienu no lasāmām avīzēm, Vācijā finanšu avīzēm, kurā tiek izdota Frankfurte, bet to lasa visu Vācijā. Mēs esam uzaicinājuši viņu, lai viņš sniegtu savu viedokli, tātad tomēr, kā var izmantot Eiropas Savienībā esošu likumdošanu, lai tomēr pielāgot fiskālo politiku Eiropas prasībām. Tātad, lūdzu, Kristiāni, es dodu vārdu jums.
So, dear Igor, thank you very much for the warm welcome. And ladies and gentlemen, I have just to give some preliminary remarks. That is, I'm of course not an economist. I'm now the legal expert, and I have worked as a legal expert with several entities in Germany. That was at first the Deutche Bundesbank, and then I worked as a journalist for 2 years, and then I joined a major bank, medium-sized major bank in Germany. I was the general secretary, and then additionally the head of the legal department. Additionally, I'm a lecturer at the University of Sarbrikene, and especially at the Institute of the Center for European Law. So, I'm not an economist, otherwise I would have been more happier to understand the figures and the curves and the facts as written out. But anyway, these facts and figures have to be passed into a law in legal drafts, and that is what I'm commenting on. We heard a lot about the facts, we heard a lot about figures, we heard a lot about financial discipline, about fiscal discipline, about fiscal austerity, budget discipline, and all these words are comprising definitions or are pretending to be definitions. We are dealing with words which are permanently used, words which seem to be clear, but how we, in other way, ask, what is black? What does white mean? What is green? So I answer, coal and pitch are black, mostly. Snow is white, mostly. One would not ask, is it a dark black? Is it a bright white? Black is black and white is white. Regarding green, yes, green is green. Always. But without any doubt, the next question would be, Which green is it? Is it a dark one? Is it a bright one? The differentiation, as we see, the definition makes it. Insofar, I'm very pleased with the issue of this conference. When does fiscal austerity ensure and when does it undermine economic development? The differentiation also here makes it, and the definition. And it shows two sides of the same coin. Here and today, I do not dare to offer you a definition for fiscal discipline or fiscal austerity. The problem is, you may look around and you will not be content within the choir of definitions given by experts. That most simple one I found is wording, I quote, fiscal discipline refers to a government that has established a good economy. It simply means that the country's government has already reached a stable economy. Does this definition cut a long story short? No. Why? It does not take into account a lot of basics. The view has established leaves away future developments. The view on the good economy does not regard the public needs. Besides, what does it mean, good economy? Therefore, I refer to another definition you will find widespread. Financial discipline is not to match government spending, or financial discipline and austerity are careful management of a government's budget. A serious definition, ladies and gentlemen, focuses on the public budget and on the management of revenues and expenditures in short, medium, and long terms. But even this leaves doubts. As we have seen and will see, referring to a work about budgeting in the monetary union, it is said, there is a wide agreement on the need for fiscal discipline, but there are several problems with our current definition on it. The complexity of the question, what is fiscal discipline, may be shown by another aspect. Regarding the strength of public finances, it is criticized, e.g., that it often makes, brackets, no distinction between current and capital expenditures, even though the latter affect the government's future cash flows, the former do not. This practice tends to introduce an anti-investment bias into financial discipline that may be in effect a bias against future growth with potentially adverse consequences for public finances themselves. Insofar we are not endowed with the principle of accuracy, transparency, and reality of managing a budget in good practice, but with sound fiscal management. And what is sound? I would like to draw the attention to all those words which underlie changeable political influence definitions. E.g., what does inflation mean? What is discipline? Where are its limits? Which are the benchmarks? The demand for fiscal discipline is a result of exceeding debt budgets and, mostly in the same terms, a rise of inflation. It is said that governments who build up debts which never can be paid back cause or enhance inflation. Thus, they are enjoying the fact that they get enough devaluated money to pay back the formerly far more valuable. Financial discipline, fiscal discipline, is last not least a demand with respect to future generations. They should not be overloaded by debts left by their predecessors. A general experience insofar is evident and a major motivation for the introduction of a debt brake. In good times, budget managers never tend to save money for bad times. So, in good times, public debts are aggregated and accumulated. In bad times, they are taken on the top. To make the basket full, the contrary of fiscal discipline is fiscal laxity. Regarding this, we are in the midst of our issue, because the third point, following the line of fiscal discipline, is bonus for discipline and, more important, punishment for laxity. The Romans said, and it is a principle in our legal culture of Europe, also in the US, nulla pena sine lege, an old principle of sanctions. If you want to fine someone, you should have known before he committed a fraud what exactly so has been expected and ordered by law not to do by the government. Concerning the budget, therefore, clear rules have to be given by the legislator. And there we are. We have now made a circle, and we are at the beginning again, meaning the definition, the clear definition. I'm not an economist. So the economists have to say something about what they understand with fiscal discipline, and then the lawmakers, the parliamentarians, will have to catch it in words. As there is no binding definition actually for financial discipline in detail, it is very simple to refer to that what politicians decide it to be in the framework of the wide varieties of legal systems. Therefore, let us envisage some different attempts which have been undertaken to manage budgets in best way. That means also for future arguments in the course of your legislation now. A lot is possible, I stress, and in conformity with a general issue and effect to achieve any range and status of financial discipline restricting on Europe. We have some example, and I want to refer to that. I refer to Switzerland. Since 2003, Switzerland relies on a debt rate based on strict rules instead of parliamentary discretion. The rule is relatively simple. It limits the expenditures during a cycle of years up to the revenues. To the latter attach the so-called factor of economic development, respecting the trend of the cycles. The effect: in boom times, the expenditures have to be lower than budget revenues. In times the economy runs down, expenditures may exceed the revenues. The debt rate comprises exceedings in special situations. These exceedings must be documented. Sanctions have to be taken up to a schedule of 3 years to reduce the overdraft below the limit. Second example, Germany. The debt rate has been taken into the Constitution since 2009. Debt rate affects no reduction of debt itself, but reduction of amount of new net credit in the budget. The structural new debt, independent from economic development, is limited to 0.35% of GDP. Exceptions to the have to be passed by a qualified or absolute majority in the parliament, Deutche Bundesbank. And they are actually discussed in the legislation process. We have it in the Constitution, but the process to make the law based on it is still in discussion. These discussions comprise catastrophes and so on. And in these discussions would also be considered as extra normal event, the financial crisis we have just run through or will be envisaging after breach and allowance. More important for our work, here the weak points of this debt break, which is now anchored in the German Constitution. I quote, the debt rate endangers the macroeconomic stability and the future of our children. This is the sum up of a public statement given by a member of the expert team to advise the German government on economic affairs, the so-called Sachverständigenrat. The concerns are shared by 300 other experts and signed by them, by other economic experts, by professors, high-ranked people, and signed. The concerns of these general statements are mainly in detail: counterproductive effects of a debt break in a period of recession, breach of the so-called golden rule for budget to provide for an active policy for future by investments. Restriction to investments in the actual definition is not enough, but extending the definition of investment also on education, science, research, and developments to develop and guarantee a life perspective for future generations. It's a so-called Bofinger-Horn paper. These issues stress that criticism on debt break and demands on sound management of budget are not contradictory. And that is what I give you as a message. It is not either or. You are in favor of a debt break, so you are not in favor of a development of the future, nor is it a debt break is an absolute threshold. No, it's you as politicians, or it's you as parliamentarians, or it's you as voters later on to vote responsible. It is up to you all to say we will have to look for a definition being entered into a legislation which leaves space for these irregularities in life, economy, and in worldwide development. One has to disclose targets, plannings, and conflicts between policy areas to achieve a sustainable result in a medium term. This is a general proposal, so you have to define, you have to say what will we achieve, and of course you will not, in a frame of a debt rate, say we'll take debts and the government will spend it to each one. Yes, there are certain limits which are in a general understanding not to be overpassed. But there is also, out of my point of view, the clear message: you must have space, you have to leave the door open for extraordinary developments, and you have to I would say, to widen the definition for investment to the possibility to spend money to, for example, finance the time a young girl, a young man is spending at the university and to get skilled and to serve later on in any service for the country or to be employed in a company here. You have to make them possible to provide for all that. I must admit and I must add that we have a big public-owned bank, which is not a profit bank, but it has to serve for the development of our country, the KfW, Kreditanstalt für Wiederaufbau, and they give out these loans. These loans are tightly adapted to the needs of the young people, and they will then, of course, they have to check that they do a good study time. They have to check it, then they will get their loans. Then, after having passed the examinations and entering into the practice, they will have to, they can't wait with the payback for some time, because of course then if they are in the office of a lawyer or if they are working in an enterprise, they have to wear some suits, so they have to buy some suits, they have to buy some pants, whatever else, they have to rent an apartment, which is quite a different thing from a student's apartment. So, and after the time, they begin with paying back this loan given by the KfW, and this is in moderate rates run for, I don't know exactly, but maybe for 10 years or so. So, these investments for the future I comprise under the terms investment, and these door should be opened to give a future to the country, to give a future to the young people, to develop the country and to stop the immigration. Those were two examples I gave you, Switzerland and Germany. And now you and we all are members of the European community, of the European Union now. What does the EU legislation provide for, which is a framework Brussels gives for you and for us? There's a slight difference. Germany is a member of the Euro currency zone. You are not, perhaps during the last month you will have considered that perhaps you are happier to stay outside at the moment. Generally, the legislation of the European Union takes care for the budget of the European institutions, that is, addressing themselves. And we have there the very clear decision to ensure budgetary discipline. The Union will not release any proposal for a community act which is likely to have appreciable implication for the budget without providing the assurance that that measure is capable of being financed within the Union's own resources. That is a general agenda, binding agenda for the institutions of the European Union. Now, what's to say with respect to the member states? It's far more interesting. Member states will have to manage their budget within the frame of EU fiscal or budgetary discipline. That means member states shall avoid excessive government deficits. The EU Commission is entitled to monitor the obedience. But again, what does excessive government deficit mean? Detailed provision of all the definitions and following procedures are laid down in the so-called Stability and Growth Pact. Basically, there are some exceptions. It is to be applied on all member states. An excessive government deficit is defined by certain threshold points. By 3% as relation between public deficit and GDP, and 60% as relation between public debt and GDP. Article 1. I will not focus on following procedures which are provided for, nor possible sanctions on the ground of the EU Council's decision, but important is that the EU Commission is kept to submit previously a report if a member state does not fulfill one or both requirements. The report, I quote, shall also take into account whether this government deficit exceeds government investment expenditure and take into account all other relevant factors, including the medium-term economic and budgetary position of the member states. And that's what we are now in midst in. We are not talking about making debts to make any senseless benefits to others. We are talking about which measures we take here in Latvia to make the economy coming out of the valley, to provide a hopeful future for the people, to create jobs, and so on and so on. So, the Commission will have to take into account whether this government, this Latvian government deficit exceeds government investment expenditures. So that's one point. And the second point, and take, I quote now, also into account all other relevant factors, including the medium-term economic and budgetary position. So, if you take that into account and you sum up a bad, a dull, a hopeless future, and means and measures to invest into jobs, to invest into skills, invest into universities, establish medium-sized, small-sized companies. That is the other thing. Insofar, the legislation of the EU is not so bad as it is often talked about. You should take your hard government here in both hands and go to Brussels and say, this is an extremely different case we have in comparison to Germany, even to Spain, to the others, yes? And we take money now and make programs, well described and realistic programs to develop this country. And then the EU Commission, I'm quite sure, could not then than to agree to it. They will hear that about that, but these things have to be applied by the government. So the good news, the other good news, there will take place not a flat view on government deficit excess, but a hopefully distinguishing view on consumption and investive expenditures. Additionally, I told you the Commission will take into account in this report the medium-term economic position. So that's just what I mentioned before. Another good news is the 3% and the 60% are not binding for you. They are focusing on the member states of the Eurozone, not on you. You are expected to do, you are expected to achieve these goals, yes, and the Commission will monitor that, and yes, you will have to report to the Commission your success you have made on this way, and yes, the Council will give you advice to act in this way and in that way, but expressively in this EU treaty, it is a derogation for members with derogation of the monetary union. So you will not be fined if you don't meet these or don't achieve or don't heading these goals given by the EU treaty. And the same is we have a regulation which precises it, handling the budgetary policy. So it will be, I would say, also not a big obstacle to envisage that and to argue with good arguments that you are on your own way and you will meet the others when you have found your way. We are, by the way, during this discussions in the last developments last years, coming back to the realistic view that Europe can't develop in one train, but perhaps one must take two trains, and on different ways one will meet at the station, at the central station of the same quality, but each one takes another train. Some bitterness will be added by the fact that despite the privileges of member states with derogation, there will be this steady monitoring, but as I said, this is not an obstacle itself. And some further bitterness will now be that you heard it and you read it in the press, that after the last summit we had, some political leaders in the Union tend to establish now in the EU treaty such an amendment for a debt rake. So I'm quite sure they will consider how to do it after the news we had yesterday from Greece. The politicians fear a referendum, and you can be quite sure within 27 member states we have now for amending such a debt baked into the EU treaty. There will be 2 or 3 member states which have, due to their constitutional law, to submit the question to a referendum. And you know what happened in Ireland, you know what happened in France, you know what happened at the other time with the introduction of the euro, I think in Denmark. They will fear this to do. And I am far more convinced that they will look for another way. Another way could be that you say, no, we leave the treaties as they are, but we'll take the weight of a regulation. A regulation is, I would say, on the step under the constitution of the EU, under the duty, like a law. A regulation, I quote the definition given by the EU treaty, shall have general application. It shall be binding in its entire and direct application, and is entirely and directly applicable in all member states. Now, what then if the bureaucrats in Brussels make a wording which is not good for you because they don't respect this wider definition of investments, or if they don't leave you open law for your special needs to finance industry here, what does then happen? I'm also convinced the treaty does not provide a general policy on budget so strictly for all countries. You could only, perhaps with good legal sound, you could say that this regulation would be heading and would be applicable to the member states of the Eurozone. So that's what I expect to come, a regulation for the members of the Eurozone. And so far, you are until now out of it, and we are happy to be out of it. But there's one left concern. A regulation is for all member states, and if you look into the commentaries on this, yes, for all member states, but you may limit to some geographical or other borders of the member states. So it's clear they will make it applicable only to the member states of the Eurozone, and we will not be directly affected. Indirectly, it may be that you will be affected because it's quasi a benchmark, and people will say, yes, and this tax rate is not has not been introduced into the Latvian legislation. That could be, and insofar, I would say Brussels is quite far. It's, I think, 1,600 kilometers from here, and each one thinks Brussels is quite far. No, don't underestimate the near Brussels for your legislation, because, as I said, could be a benchmark, and then later on, politicians here say, well, the EU has introduced that, we introduced that in our own legislation. That is why I personally would advise that if your government would do that, but they won't do that because they have another policy, if your government wants to have a door opened in this regulation, they should, in the council where they are sitting and where they are representing Latvia, take care for it that this door opener leaves in the texting of the legal proposal which is submitted to them. They can't do that alone. Germany even couldn't do that alone. But this government, I think, has, with respect to its own needs, look for allies. They have to look around. What's with the Czechs? What is with the Hungarians? What is with these people, and with these member states who are not belonging to those for which you say the richer become richer and the poorer become poorer? Yes, would be if you have such a debt break. That could be the big danger. So the government has to learn to look what could be the indirect consequences of such a regulation, which not is directly applicable to Latvia, but indirect makes efforts on Latvia, looking for allies, looking for countries which are in the same situation or which are close to you by other things of policy. So, coming to an end, the national legislation of Latvia, I won't quote, we have talked about that a lot, and I want only to stress one thing. If you enter such legislation with a wider definition of investment, or with a door opener to investments in case of excessive events and developments in the economic cycles. If you introduce that into your legislation, one will say, "Oh, that may harm on the international capital markets, and it will perhaps affect our currency exchange rate." Will it really? Will it really? It will be discussed, of course. But if you insert in your own legislation clear signs when you can exceed the expenditures, and the markets will be very keen on that, they will monitor that, and if you do the right thing, and if you invest in the right manner, the markets will not take a negative consequence of that, and then you can be, I would say, relying on a better future with growth of economy and with hope to people, and also with a perspective of those who have left you. What you said, they have been skilled here, they have been trained here, they have made costs to companies, they have made costs to the general economy, and then they go out. An economist serves in Frankfurt in a bank. He's well trained, he has very good examiner. You have paid for it by taxes, by all that what was given to the university, to budgets and so on. But he's not working for the welfare here and for the income of this country. He's working for Germany. And others are, I know, going to Canada. I've recently learned to know that a young couple coming from here, they emigrated to Canada. Well, Canada is happy to have them. All the others are happy to get skilled people. All the others are happy not to invest, but to benefit from the qualification which was paid by your country. Yes. Then, if you think of that, you have a means and measure by this legislation to redress it and to make this Latvia also to be a good health to come back for young people coming from abroad. Thank you.
Paldies, Kristian, par ļoti pamācošu lekciju. Mēs tagad varbūt drošāki savas mēģinājumus uzlabot situāciju mūsu attiecībās ar Briseli. Un tagad mums seko